Welcome to the 14th annual Ariel Avrech Yahrzeit lecture. Thank you all for joining us today. Please silence your phones. And we would greatly appreciate it if you would sign your name in the guest book, which is on the table in front, so you could do it afterwards. Planning this lecture is a big job and could not be done without Rebecca Jalali, who basically runs Young Israel Century City. Rebecca's work has been even more complicated than usual as she works in exile while our shul is under construction. Rebecca nimbly coordinates our shul's many fine programs. So thank you, Rebecca. A special thanks to Rabbi Abraham Lieberman for so generously making Eula High School available for this lecture last year and this year. And Yirtzeh Hashem, next year we will be back in the Young Israel Century City. During Ariel's long illness, there was one man who always sat by Ariel's side, a man who could always be counted on for spiritual support and common sense advice. Rabbi Elazar Moskin is not just a friend to the Avrech family, but a pillar of our lives here in Los Angeles. Ariel was proud to call Rabbi Moskin his Rebbe. Ariel loved being with his friends, and so a gathering like this is exquisitely attuned to his soul. This morning's program will proceed as follows. Karen, my wife, Ariel's mother, will make the introductory remarks. Then Yehuda Kaplan, Ariel's friend from Yeshiva Gedola High School, will give us his remembrance of Ariel. After Yehuda, Daniel Greenfield will deliver the Ariel Avrech Yahrzeit lecture, followed by a question-answer period. The Kel Malei Rachamim will be recited by Dr. Goldenberg, after which I will say the Kaddish, and then you are all invited to brunch. I am honored to turn the podium over to my beloved wife, Karen.
Good morning. The only reason that I agreed to speak today is so I could finally publicly thank my husband for planning all the details of the lecture every year. Robert is the one who makes all the phone calls, arranges the food, videographer, communicates with Rebecca, confirms logistics, and most importantly, stuffs the envelopes and licks the stamps. Of course, I have final approval. Thank you, Robert, for all your hard work. Guests in our home often wind up in Ariel's room. Ariel kept his belongings precisely cataloged and was reluctant to dispose of his favorite toys and mementos. I recently discovered a neat bundle of all the bar mitzvah and even bat mitzvah invitations he ever received. The sacred texts have their shelf space, but so do full sets of Calvin and Hobbes, Harry Potter, Bruce Colville, and Roald Dahl. Ariel was a Renaissance boy. His collections range from the divine to the fantastic to comic satire. Some may think holding on to Ariel's belongings as unhealthy or even morbid, too much dwelling on the past, creating a shrine. I don't. Ariel's room is not a museum. It is a geniza, a trove of seraphic secrets that continually reveal themselves and allow us to connect with Ariel's intellect, curiosity, and wit. Recently, we found a letter that Ariel had written to us from Ner Yisrael. It was his last term there, the spring of 2002. Finding this lightened our hearts and reminded us of his specialness. On April 15, 2002, Ariel wrote, "Dear Mom and Dad, I am doing very well, Baruch Hashem. I'm going to sleep a little earlier, so I'm a little bit more, alive during the day. You are right, I probably was not getting enough sleep before. In addition, I think I'm having an easier time because of three things. 1, the daylight hours are a lot longer. 2, the grass is very green and it feels very springy outside, not like the darkness and wet of the winter. 3, it's not as cold now. In California, one doesn't have these seasonal changes, but they really make a difference. My Rebbe said that the seasons are supposed to evoke certain feelings in a person based on what's needed at that time. The first warm day here, I couldn't believe how lush the grass looked on the ground that a few months ago was bare and muddy. Now I know what you mean when you say you miss New York because of the seasons. Moshe Feldhammer was with Saba's hotel for Pesach, and Jonathan Beck was with Grandpa, the two grandfathers. They were both very impressed. How is everything doing there? I hope you feel better soon, Mom. Did Aliza win any more basketball games? I can't wait to see you when you get to Baltimore. Love, Ariel. This letter encapsulates Ariel's ability to elevate the most mundane aspects of life. He spoke to his Rebbe about spring fever, casting a spiritual light on the weather. Ariel also cared deeply for his family and his friends. He had an incisive sense of humor, quick to grasp the ironies in life. Even a casual note is flavored by his intelligence, wit, and his quest for meaning in life. Thank you.
Yehuda Kaplan was one of Ariel's best friends in Yeshiva Gedola High School. In a letter Ariel wrote to his sister Aliza in the summer of 2002, Ariel said this about his good friend, quote, Yehuda Kaplan found someone trying to steal his bike, but he's such a big guy, he scared the thief away. Close quote. Yehuda will share some of his memories of Ariel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yehuda Kaplan. As Mr. Avrech mentioned, I was one of Ariel's really good friends in high school and post-high school. It actually didn't start out that way. He came to our class from a Hillel. He skipped a year, and we really didn't have anything in common whatsoever. Maybe in the first week, I asked him, how come he doesn't play basketball with us? He says, well, I never really learned how. I said, come here, let me show you. And I handed the ball to him. He dribbled one time, hit his foot, ball rolled away. I said, all right, I'll see you in a couple years. From there, our friendship really developed a little bit later. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But that was my first real meeting with Ariel. Just about 12 years ago, almost to the day, 12 years and a couple months maybe, I got a telephone call from a friend of mine, Yossi Shiner. He said, Yehuda, did you get engaged? I'm like, yeah, He said, go check out Seraphic Secret. So I looked at it, and Mr. and Mrs. Avrech had been to our Vart the night before, and he wrote one of his blog posts, and he ended it off, and it was very powerful. And this has pretty much stayed with me ever since that time. I wondered, did it really happen? Did I once have a son, an amazing child who rebuilt my universe? Did I have a son who lived and then died? Is this really my life? So many questions that just formed right there, and it just stuck with me on how do I answer all of these questions, and why do they mean so much to me? As Orthodox Jews and just as people, all of our lives are made up of infinite moments. And those moments are created, family, friends, actions, interactions, and they create who we are. And in high school, it's one of those building blocks of all of our lives where 20 years on, we reference it all the time. These are my friends for life. And there were just so many of these moments with Ariel that just shaped me, and I'm here to share them with you as we're here at a memorial lecture, and I want to show you or tell you about certain moments that just struck me and then stuck with me. That basketball one was the first of many. I'm just going to give you a few of them. They're not really that grand or the grand scheme of things where they shaped large human events, but they were just very important to me and to our group of friends. The first Shabbos, we walked to Ariel to visit him in the hospital. It was one of those really hot, Shabbos afternoons in the mid-90s, and oddly enough in LA in January, February time. And we were just all complaining, no Erev. We were all walking a couple of miles. Oh, it's so hot, it's so hot, it's so hot. And we all kind of walked into that hospital room to see Ariel for the first time. And he was just there, and he was sitting there, obviously, very nauseous, not feeling well. And he just started, talking to us about what was going on in school, in our class, what we had learned that week. We started talking about politics and sports. He didn't complain about anything. And I think all of us just had this moment, this zeitgeist where, wow, how could we possibly complain about the mundane when a friend of ours is kind of going through this? And it was really one of the last times that, you just kind of complain in a serious tone about simple things that happen in our life. And we just kind of all banded together. That formed the beginning of just, this is something that we did all the time. Constant, like every Shabbos, we visited him. During the week between end of school and night Seder, we just drove over to the hospital and visited him. We went to his house. It is something that we just did. We didn't call beforehand. We didn't schedule anything. It just became a part of our lives. So much so that even after high school, we were in constant communication with each other. I was always heading over to Mr. and Mrs. Avrech's house. Just knocked on the door, walked right in. Ariel was sitting there, walked to the hospital. Ariel was there. Just constantly, this is what we did. It just formed something in my life and in all of our lives. It didn't feel like something special or something unique, but all of us together always did that. I'd open the door, Mr. Avrech would ask us how we were doing. Mrs. Avrech would say, "How are you, boys?" It didn't matter that I had about 200 pounds on her and a foot taller than her. She just called me, what are the boys? That's who we were to them. And we just loved it. It was something special. And we never talked about what he was going through on a day-to-day basis on the physical. It was always in his mind and what he was doing, mentally, what we were learning in yeshiva, how we were going, where we were coming from. It was a privilege to host him in my house. We used to vie for the honor when there was a Shabbos or an in Shabbos or something where he would have to stay on our side of town. And I remember it was Simchas Torah. He was at my house for a couple days, and we were walking home after the Hakafas. It was maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, and we were all excited. It was a beautiful Yontif, and Ariel was just telling us about a new Rishon or an Achron that were arguing, and he had like a little bit of an insight and a chiddush on it. And that's what he wanted to talk about at 1 o'clock in the morning. That was just a part of who he was, every day of his life. Another moment that just, shines out so brightly for me. And again, this is just a really small moment. We were in yeshiva, and the Rebbeim have taught this Masechta over and over again. They know every question. They know every answer. These are Talmidei Chachamim who've learned their entire lives. And we were in 11th grade, and it's Rabbi Altusky, and if anybody knows him, you'll really appreciate this story. And, Ariel would start his question or his chiddush to Rabbi Altusky, and Rabbi Altusky's face would just light up at this erudition coming out of Ariel. And it was just such a special moment for the 20 of us sitting in the room where we just knew we were encountering greatness. And he was just so special in that way, and it was just seeing an artist at work in class. I remember him walking out of class, and he was intellectually so rigorous that as he would walk out of class, that was like me after 2 hours of basketball. That's how he brought every day, his life into ours. These are just these moments, just so special to me, and they shaped me so powerfully and so strong that, again, it's years and years. I met him in 1994, and now we're in 2017, and he's just such a part of my life. We have a WhatsApp chat, bunch of high school friends. We're constantly on it. We constantly go at it. Mr. Avrech would be happy. We've got 4 conservatives and 2 liberals. A lot of fighting going on over there, very vehement. And it's been about 2 years now. I don't think anybody's ever won an argument, but that's fine. And I just always imagine Ariel being in that argument, and these are the moments where when we would go to his house and we would talk and we would go over it. And it was also very interesting where, today I would, let's say, be a conservative in the secular world, but I guess I'm more of a liberal in the Orthodox world. And it's an interesting dichotomy that he would have definitely appreciated. Going back to Mr. Avrech's questions, and Ariel was so insightful. So how did we really kind of become friends? So yeah, I visited him a lot. He was so sincere and so dedicated that the simplest interaction that you would have with him, and Mr. Avrech writes it in his thing, he would ask these such insightful questions. He wanted to know about everything that you were going on in your life, how you felt, how it made you feel. Why do you feel that way? What are you thinking when that happens? Where could you take that? Part of things that were part of my life was, after Ariel passed away, we kept Mr. and Mrs. Avrech in our lives. Call them before Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. One of the first telephone calls that I made after I got engaged was to Mr. and Mrs. Avrech to let them know. After the birth of my children, I call them, of course. And I remember we invited Mr. Avrech to go shooting with us between my engagement and my wedding. And, Mr. Avrech looks at me and he's like, "Oh, so Yehuda, you got engaged, yeah? Do me a favor, tell me the reasons why you love your wife. How did you know that this was the right woman for you based on those dates?" And we were close, but I mean, those were personal questions. My parents didn't ask me that. And my dad was like, "Oh, you're engaged? Good. Okay, great. Let's go." Got a little nervous also if it was going to end up in the blog. And, you have to be a little careful sometimes. And, again, also Mrs. Avrech, just how are you? How are you doing? What is going on? And you could tell that these questions that they posed to me is where Ariel got it from them. And they're just a special family, and they just meant so much to us growing up. They helped form us. They helped shape us. Yesterday I was just reading the Wall Street Journal, and this kind of just hit me as a powerful moment. Diamonds are very unique. One of the things that they do that's very unique is they slow down light. I mean, literally, they slow down light. That is what they do. The light goes into that diamond. The diamond literally slows it down, and then it turns it into, and it shines it bright. So Mr. Avrech asked us all these questions. Did it really happen? Did I once have a son, an amazing child who rebuilt my universe? Did I have a son who lived and then died? Is this really my life? And one of the things I was thinking, how do you ask these questions? Of course you had a son. Of course he was this person. How did this happen? Did it really happen? Did it really not happen? It really did happen. Why are we struggling so much with him? Why is it 14 years later and we get such a crowd to interact and remember and think about such a powerful friend of ours? And again, even in the height, like I was telling you on our WhatsApp chat, we're always talking about him. We think of things that he said, how he meant to us. And he was this diamond, Mr. Avrech, Mrs. Avrech. He slowed down light. He's still with me. I sense him in my mind. I feel him on my heart. And he's just there. He slowed down his light so much that he's still with us all the time. And those are just some of my memories. I thank you all for being here and just remembering him with us.
There is a small number of citizen journalists whom Karen and I faithfully read. Daniel Greenfield is one of the select few. His blog, Sultan Knish, and his articles for Front Page are invaluable, required reading for anybody who cares about the state of Western civilization. Daniel is an eloquent defender of Israel and a fearless critic of the left and especially radical Islam. So persuasive is Daniel's body of work that he has been quoted by, among others, Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, Mark Starn, Mark Levin, Alan West, Carolyn Glick, Melanie Phillips, Michelle Malkin, Victor Davis Hanson, The Blaze, National Review, and Fox News. Recently, Daniel moved to Los Angeles in order to marry our Ilana, Mazel Tov. Ariel did not know Daniel, but I am certain that our beloved son would adore this brilliant and modest man. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Greenfield.
Thank you so much, Robert and Karen. Year after year has passed, and once again we're here. We're gathered to remember an incredible young man. I haven't had the privilege of knowing Ariel in person. I have the privilege of knowing his parents. And I've participated in these memorials from afar by watching them remotely. It's an honor and also an even greater responsibility to stand here and to speak to you. This day is a tribute to the impact that Ariel Avrech had in his community and their parents continue to have on all of us. Sooner or later, we all pass on. The day will come when we all have a tombstone in some quiet place, when we are only a memory. We live on in two ways. We continue on in the spiritual realm, in the presence of God. And we live on here in the memory of our friends, our family, our loved ones. And we live on in the positive impact that we make through them. The conversations you have with your children will echo in the conversations they have with theirs. The wisdom you learned from your parents is a faint echo of men and women whose names have been forgotten, but who were your ancestors thousands of years ago, stretching back all the way to Sinai. One day, hundreds of years from now, a descendant you will never meet will pass on an echo of yours into a distant generation, and a part of you will live on in his words and the impact that they make. As Jews, we know that we are a people of the book, but before much of the oral Torah was written down, there was a Torah Sheba'al Peh. It was passed on through word of mouth. We are a people perpetually in conversation with each other. Thank you for coming to join us in this conversation. There are many kinds of conversations, and there's a saying. Small minds talk about people, great minds speak about ideas. It's a tribute to Ariel and to his parents, Robert and Karen, that their conversation is about ideas, and that the conversation that they spread in Ariel's name is a conversation of ideas, into words that echo on. I'm going to read you a quote from Ariel that his parents shared with me. Look into the thesaurus under greatness. You get importance, magnitude, fame, size, immensity. Such are the values of our culture. This was a quote that Ariel carried around with him. And this quote shows how different his values were. And those values can live on through the way that we remember him. Ariel is, of course, no longer with us. But he's changing the world, and he's changing all of us. In his honor and in his memory, I want to speak about a world that he never saw, but a world that he's having an impact on today, right now, our world. When Ariel passed away, the world was on the verge of major challenges that we are dealing with day in, day out. And since then, things have gotten much worse since his time. Anti-Semitism has hit unprecedented levels. Defending Israel has become much harder than ever. The question is, why is that? It's 2017. Gay marriage is legal. Everything is multicultural everywhere. People are more tolerant than ever. People are more tolerant of everything than ever, except the things they're intolerant of. If anti-Semitism is just another garden variety bigotry, if it's just some small-minded prejudice, then things should be much better now than they used to be. If Israel is being attacked because of the so-called occupation, then Israel should be much more popular now than it was after the Six-Day War. After all, Israel has given back so much land, it's given back so much territory, it's made so many peace deals. And yet, it isn't easier to be more pro-Israel now than it used to be 30, 40 years ago. In fact, it's gotten much, much harder. So why doesn't it work that way? Why instead does it seem as if the more tolerant society gets, the more intolerant of Jews it becomes? Why are Jews fleeing some of the most multicultural cities in Europe? Why is Berkeley a safe space for everyone except Jews? Why is the anti-Israel movement that much stronger after all of Israel's efforts to make peace year in and year out? Why is everything backward for the Jews? When we try to do the things that we're supposed to do, the things we're told to do, things get worse instead of better, because what we're doing isn't working. The fact that it's 2017 and I'm giving a speech about how to fight anti-Semitism and defend Israel shows that it isn't working. The strategies that we've learned have failed. We need new strategies. And taking a page from George from Seinfeld, I'm going to suggest that we should be doing the exact opposite of what we think we should be doing. We should be doing the opposite, and for the same reason. Instead of doing the things that we think will make people like us, we should be true to ourselves. And then we might actually be liked, and you know what? More importantly, we'll actually deserve to be liked. I'm not going to devote this speech to talking about how terrible the people who hate us are. If you're sitting here, you probably should know that already. I'm not going to discuss in detail Islamic terrorists, the radical left, the alt-right, or any other groups that are anti-Semitic. Frankly, they're not a real problem. We are a real problem. The challenge to us comes not from the anti-Semitism outside, it comes from the anti-Semitism within, and that's my topic. Jews are a minority. That means we're neurotic, we're insecure, we're self-conscious. We think about what other people think of us. And when we talk about anti-Semitism or Israel, we focus on the anti-Semites. We focus on why do they hate us? How can we make them stop hating us? Why is the world so unfair? Why is the United Nations so unfair? Why is the State Department so unfair? Those are good philosophical questions. Why is life unfair? We're not going to solve that question anytime soon. The question that we can actually address is the thing that we actually have control over. We don't have control over the world. We do have control over ourselves. Anti-Semitism has existed since the invention of the Jewish people. The Jewish people come into being in Shmos, in the book of Exodus. 2 verses after they come into being, Pari comes on stage and announces, we have a Jewish problem. We've got to do something about this Jewish problem that we have. 19 words after the invention of the Jewish people, anti-Semitism comes into being. Anti-Semitism is the evil twin that has always existed side by side with the Jewish people. And at times it gets better, at times it gets worse in different countries, in different places, in different times. It varies. But anti-Semitism always exists, bikol dar v'dar, in every single generation. Now, as a minority group, we have 2 options. It's the same options every minority group has. We can try to make the world like us, or we can learn to like ourselves. The greatest anti-Semitic threat that we face today is Jewish participation and collaboration in anti-Semitic movements. Yes, Iran wants to nuke us, but who helped make that happen? Who helped prevent every Jewish effort, every Israeli effort to take out Iran's nuclear program? Yes, BDS is a major threat, but every time you see BDS activists out front, you will see Jews. Most Jews, of course, don't knowingly collaborate with genocidal anti-Semitism. Even many of those Jews who do collaborate don't quite understand what they're doing. But quite a few Jews don't resist them because they're worried about how to be liked. They're insecure, they want to be nice. And you know what? Being nice is very nice. It's very nice to be nice, except when you're too nice to defend yourself. When you're so nice that you give up on everything, including your dignity and your self-respect, your land, your people, and your future, so that your enemies will like you. And then, at the end of the day, when you've done all that, they add insult to injury, they hate you even more. Let's talk about a coat. That's right, a coat. The story of the coat comes from the Gemara. What does a moldy old Talmudic coat from thousands of years ago have to do with everything? It's part of that conversation. The conversation of Jewish life has continued for thousands of years. When I stood in Ariel's room, I was awed by the number of Sfarim of Jewish scholarly books that he studied. And Ariel would surely have been familiar with the famous Mishnah in Baba Metzia. It tells the story of 2 men in a coat. Shnayim achsim betawas. 2 men that come to court, they're arguing over the ownership of a coat. One man says, it's my coat. The other man says, it's my coat. And so they split the coat. It's a very Solomonic decision. Everybody gets half the coat. They cut the coat in half. But here's what happens. One man comes in and says, the whole coat is mine. It's all my coat. The other man comes in and says, I'm going to be reasonable. I'm going to be compromised. I'll take half the coat. Just half the coat. What happens? Again, you would think, okay, well, they split the coat. But no. Instead, the man who claims the whole coat gets 3/4 of the coat. But the man who just asks for half the coat, he gets 1/4 of the coat. And that seems unfair to us. We're brought up to value compromise as an important value. He shouldn't be punished for being willing to compromise. But you know what? Let's look back at the original Solomonic decision. 2 women come to King Solomon, King Shlomo, and they both claim ownership of a baby. And Shlomo Melech, he offers a very reasonable compromise. Let's cut the baby in half. Everybody gets half the baby. But the real mother is the woman who tells the King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, no, let the other woman have her maybe, but I'm not going to cut a baby in half. I'm not going to cut my child in half. When you really care about something, when you care about a child or a country, you don't allow it to be cut in half. Compromise can be good in some areas. It's very good to compromise on some things. But when there are compelling issues at stake, it shows a lack of conviction. 2 peoples walk into the court of international opinion. One says that the entire land of Israel, which is really Palestine, is mine. The other says, while the Jewish people do have a great claim to the land, this was where our kings and our prophets once walked. This was where we have lived for thousands of years. This was the land that was promised us by God. You know what? I'm going to be reasonable. I'm going to compromise. I'm just going to take half the land. Yada, yada, yada. We'll be nice guys. We'll take half the land, half the baby, and half the coat. It's really that hard to see why we're losing this argument. When a terrorist organization that only came to its current position after the 6-Day War actually has its claims believed everywhere, well, we have our claims believed nowhere, even though our claim to the land is encoded in every single major holy book of every single major monotheistic religion. Yet we can't seem to convince anybody in the world of the justice and the rightness of our case. Why is that? Because we haven't convinced ourselves. On the wall of Ariel's room, I saw a map of Eretz Yisrael. We see those maps everywhere. But how many of us really have the conviction that this land belongs to us? The other side has made it very abundantly clear that they are not going to compromise, and peace deal after peace deal, they've come away saying, we want everything. We're not going to make peace until we get everything. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. You can see that one at terrorist rallies. You can see it on the University of California campuses. On the other hand, we announce, as often as we can, we're eager to compromise. We want to compromise. We want to give away as much of the land as we can because we're such good people. They insist that they want to give away nothing. We insist that we want to give away as much as we can, and we wonder why we keep losing this argument. Because, of course, we're willing to cut the baby in half because we're such nice guys. But are we really nice guys? Why are we really compromising? The other side believes that we're compromising because we know that we're wrong. We're the guy coming in the coat who doesn't even insist on the whole coat. He's going to take half the coat because he has no real claim to the coat in the first place. We're more willing to make peace because we're wrong. The other side is unwilling to make peace because the justice of the case is on its side. That's why it refuses to make peace. It's not the truth, but if you want to understand why we keep losing the argument, this is a very good place to start. A compromise is still a negotiation. To negotiate successfully, you have to negotiate from a position of conviction. And we lack conviction. Why do we lack conviction? Because we're afraid that we won't be liked. If we completely stick to our case, if we stick to our guns, if we insist on the whole coat, they're not going to like us. That's the bottom line here. And we've always wanted to be liked. We're the outsiders coming into this room. We're the minority. We want everybody there to like us. And there are two types of nice people. There are people who are genuinely nice. There are genuinely wonderful people. And there are those who are insecure. They want you to like them because they don't like themselves. And so much of Jewish niceness is about that kind of insecurity. It's who we are as a people. We lack conviction because we don't value ourselves. We can give religion to the world. We can give the most amazing inventions to the world. We can cure diseases. We can break through everything. We can invent incredible technologies and cures for illnesses, but we still don't value ourselves. And so we still go around looking for affirmation from everybody else. We still need everybody else to like us. We need to be liked so badly that we'll argue against our own interests, that we'll cut our own baby in half just to show that we're good people. And there's a good reason for that inferiority complex. Jewish history is a history of persecution. Our calendar is covered in cemeteries, in burning towns, in destroyed cities, and the daily grind of being told that we're bad people by the majority. And we've been told it so often that we often believe it. How many of you know the Yiddish phrase, Schande für die Goyim? Let's go back to the first time in history that phrase appears, long before the existence of Yiddish. Long before Yiddish and German and the European Gullahs. Let's go all the way back to ancient Egypt. God sends Moshe to free the Jews. They have a talk with Parai. Parai reacts badly because nobody likes to hear that your slaves have to be set free. He throws a tantrum, and the Jewish overseers, who are the interface between Parai and the Jewish people, they come to him. They're the court Jews. And then he throws another tantrum, and then the overseers come out and they encounter Moshe and Aaron. And what did they say to the prophet of God and the high priest? Hey, vashtem es rechenu. Literally, you made us smell bad to Parai. Before, while Parai was murdering Jewish babies, he enjoyed a fragrant sandalwood and vanilla aroma. Now, it's like we haven't taken a shower in a week. What could you have done to our image with Parai? Now he doesn't like us anymore. No, now let's get into our time machine and go forward just a little bit further. Not too far ahead, just to the next parsha we're going to be reading in a moment. Why did our first conquest of Israel fail? Moshe sends in the Meraglim, the spies, to Canaan in the upcoming parsha. They're good leaders. They're wonderful people, we're told. They're completely reliable and trustworthy, but when they come back, they're angry and they're hateful toward Moshe and God. What happens to transform them? We hear that in their climactic argument, the argument that they make against entering Israel. V'niya beinenu kechagavim. When we looked at the Canaanites, we saw ourselves as nothing more than tiny little insects. V'kein hayinu beinechem, and so we appeared in their eyes. The spies came back seeing the Jews from the perspective of anti-Semites, of those who despised and hated them, and they adopted that perspective. They were filled with anger and hatred for the Jews, for God, and for Moshe. And this should sound familiar. It's a capsule history of Jewish anti-Semitism. Jewish anti-Semites adopt the perspective of those who hate them, and then they carry it back, like poison back to the nest. Let's go forward a little bit more. Before his passing, Ariel was studying Tanach. There are some who study Tanach, but neglect Gemara. There are those who study Gemara but neglect Tanach. Ariel was studying both, because both really inform who we are. So we're going to go back to one of the most pivotal and forgotten moments in Jewish history. Ancient Israel just got its first king, but Shaul doesn't have much of a kingdom. In practice, the Philistines, the Pushtim, are running much of the country. And they have, we have gun control today. Back then they had spear control. They had very tight spear ownership regulations. No Jews are allowed to own any spears. If you wanted to sharpen, Jews were not even allowed to have blacksmiths. If Jews wanted to sharpen an implement, they had to go to a Philistine blacksmith. If you wanted to know why Samson killed all those men with the jawbone of an ass, it's because the Jews were not allowed to own spears. So they had spear control. The only two people in the land who had spears were Shaul and Yonasan, his son. And the Pushti commissioner who really runs the land sits in Har Elohim. He sits on the mountain of God. When the prophets go up to the mountain of God, they have to know that the Pushti commissioner is there. He's the really occupying force. He's sitting on the mountain of God. And many of the Jews are actually in league with the occupation. Some work in the lands of the Pushtim. Some others might even have carried weapons for them, the way the Jews did for Antiochus and for the Romans. Now, Tanach uses a very specific name to describe these Jews. They're not Jews, they're Ivrim. They're Hebrews. They're not Am Yisrael because they're not really part of the Jewish people. They're just different. They carry the old name that reflects the Aver and the Har. They're on the other side of the bank, but they'd rather be on this side of the bank. They're not happy being part of the Jewish people. They're ashamed of being different. And Jonathan, King Shaul's son, he goes up and he kills the Philistine commissioner squatting like a toad on the mountain of God. And Shaul blows the shofar. And he sends a message to the Ivrim, to the Jews who have gone way off and are collaborating with the enemy. And the wording used is Ivrim Ishmael. Let the Hebrews hear. And now that Prince Yonasan struck the first blow for Jewish independence and the shofar is blown, what did the Ivrim do? What did all these Jews who have become collaborators, who are very worried about what the Philistines think of them, how did they respond? Did they rise up? No. Their answer is, V'gam nivash Yisrael b'pushtim. The Hebrews were saying the same thing as the Jewish overseers had said after Pari. This Jonathan guy, he made us seem disgusting to the enemy whose respect we want so badly. Now we smell badly to them too. What will they think of us now? And you know what? This is not just ancient history, it's current events. We're still worried, what will they think of us? Israel carries out an airstrike on Hamas. It kills a number of terrorists. One of the sons of the terrorists is in the house. And we go, oh my God, what did Israel do? Now they're going to hate us. We would have had such a great argument if they just killed the Hamas terrorists, but now one of their sons was injured. And now the world will hate us. Everybody will think badly of us. We do this so often with Jewish leaders, with Netanyahu, with our own communal Jewish leaders. We go, they're making us look bad. These Jews are making us smell bad. To the Parai, to the New York Times, they're making us look terrible. What would the Pushtim think of us? What would the world think of us? The world would have loved us if we hadn't shot first in the Six-Day War, if we'd let them invade us the way they did in the Yom Kippur War. We could have been almost destroyed, but the world would have liked us. The great Ephraim Kishon book after the war was, So Sorry We Won. For Jews, this is a narrative. So sorry we won. And today we're still looking for scapegoats. If only it wasn't for the settlements, they would like us. If only it wasn't for the IDF, they would like us. If only we had never come to Israel, they would like us. I mean, look at Germany, 1940s. They liked us back then, didn't they? That's not negotiating from a position of strength, but of weakness, moral weakness. And moral weakness is the greatest weakness that there is. We lack conviction, and so we give up the strongest position in every argument in our own defense. Now I'm going to quote you something that the Zionist leader Zev Zhabutinsky wrote. We think that our continual readiness to subject ourselves without a murmur to searchers, to turn out our pockets, will finally convince humanity that we are honorable people. We are constantly saying, look at us, we are such gentlemen, we have nothing to hide. But that is an outright error. Real gentlemen would never allow anyone to search their apartments, their pockets, or their souls for any reason whatsoever. That means not allowing anyone to dig through the pockets of your coat or your soul. Moral authority, real moral authority, doesn't come from accepting the moral authority of your enemies, but from rejecting it. That is why we are losing the argument. The enemy rejects our moral authority. We accept their moral authority. We accept the premises of the argument. And once you accept the premise of your enemy's argument, then you're defeated. Then all you're doing is nitpicking the details and arguing over how much of the baby you have to cut up. The two-state solution, the one that we're supposed to accept, accepts the moral authority and the premise of the argument of our enemies. The two-state solution is not solving the problem of violence. The violence has not gone anywhere. It's solving the Jewish problem, the age-old Jewish problem. And when we accepted the two-state solution, we thought that it would make our claim to the land of Israel stronger. Instead, it destroyed it. It didn't neutralize anti-Israel sentiment. Hatred of Israel is now stronger and more virulent than ever before. In fact, even countries and people who were once friendly to Israel are now anti-Israel thanks to the two-state solution. Why is that? Because we admitted that we were wrong. Every argument we've made since then suffers from that same fatal flaw. You know, as Jews, we're very smart people. We think we can win any argument. We think that any issue can be argued to death. We think that we can prove anything. We believe in reason. But the most important things in life cannot be proven. They're a matter of inner conviction. The reason that we believe in God is a matter of conviction. You can't prove the existence of God. It can't be proven in a court of law. The love of parents for their children, the love that brings us here to this lecture, of parents keeping their son's memory alive year after year, can't be studied under a microscope. The deepest and greatest parts of ourselves are not subject to scrutiny. They express who we are as individuals and as a people. Nations and peoples don't exist because they have a valid argument. No one comes to the Norwegians and asks, "What's your argument for existing?" No one walks up to a parent and demands that they present a good, logical reason for loving their child. Our best arguments for Israel and against anti-Semitism can't be put down on a page. We've tried to do it and we've failed over and over again. Our best arguments are who we are. When we try to be reasonable, when we compromise our convictions, then we stop being certain of who we are. We begin to think that maybe we should be someone else. Maybe our enemies have a point. You express conviction sometimes by refusing to argue about some things, and that seems counterintuitive to us because we love to argue. But sometimes you don't get into a discussion about cutting your baby in half. It's always unacceptable. When we talk about a two-state solution, we show a lack of conviction. If Israel was really our baby, we wouldn't be talking about cutting her in half. It may seem paradoxical, but the best argument we can make for ourselves is living by the conviction that we are right.
It seems to have run out of the battery.
Okay,
Speak louder.
I will do my best. There's a reason that bullies pick on some kids. It's not the fault of a child that he becomes a target, but there's something about him that draws the bully. Two things. One, he's better than the bully in some ways. He's smarter, he's more talented, he has qualities that the bully lacks and envies. And two, he lacks the strength and self-confidence to fight back. Does this sound familiar? That's anti-Semitism in a nutshell. We can't and don't want to do anything about our good qualities. Minimizing them doesn't work. We've tried that. It doesn't work on the schoolyard. It doesn't work at the United Nations. It doesn't work in the New York Times. Abandoning our religion certainly did not work. Endless philanthropy hasn't done it. Every hospital around has some Jewish names on it. It hasn't fixed anything. Insisting that we're no better than anybody else, to anybody who will listen, has accomplished exactly zero. But we actually found the strength to fight back. We have the IDF, but we still don't have the inner strength of self-confidence. Having armies isn't enough. You can be strong and still be bullied. When we're strong, the bullies turn from physical bullying to moral bullying. They tell us that we're bad for defending ourselves. And then when we've been morally bullied into not fighting back, they punch us in the face. Moral bullying is more devastating than regular bullying. Moral bullying uses our need for acceptance against us. It says that if you're really such nice people, you'll prove it by not fighting back. You'll prove it by letting the other side shoot first. You'll prove it by giving up your country and committing suicide. You can be the strongest country in the world and still be morally bullied. America experiences moral bullying all the time. You need inner strength. You need the conviction that you are right to resist moral bullying. And then when you're nice, it's because you choose to be, not because you're afraid to be. Jews have a long history of exile, and that taught us to be non-threatening, to give in, and sometimes that's a necessary survival mechanism, but there's a price to pay for that, because after a while the survival mechanism becomes your identity. And then instead of being the people of the book, we become the people who are willing to see the other side more clearly than we see the other side. Our conviction becomes that the other guy has a better point than we do, that he has a better claim to the baby, the coat, or the country than we do. Now, you've heard of Stockholm Syndrome. Being a victim of abuse risks developing a perverse and pathetic link to the abuser. That's what the survival strategy means. You try to keep yourself safe by becoming sensitive to what the guy who might attack you thinks of you. And we have this with Muslim terrorists all the time. Why do they hate us? How can we make them stop hating us? Even America, a country as great as America, can be subject to moral bullying. And when that happens, you start thinking, how do I keep him from being set off? How do I keep him from becoming angry? You think like he does. And this is where so many Jews are. We identify with the guy who is punching us in the face. It's a survival strategy that we learned in Galus, in exile. Because you have to know where the next pogrom, the next Holocaust might be coming from. But if you do that long enough, you start to find ways of thinking that maybe the people killing us are right and find ways to part ways with the Jews who deserve to be killed. That's our message to the wicked son at the Seder that separates from us. It's the message of Mordechai to Esther. And as we've seen, it goes back all the way to Egyptian slavery. We sometimes call identifying with the guy punching us in the face Rahmanus, mercy. There's a more accurate term for it, Rahmanut shel tipshim, the mercy of fools. The term is derived from Shaul, who had mercy on the leader of Amalek, yet went on to slaughter an entire city of Kohanim, of priests. Why are the two necessarily intertwined? Can't we be nice to everybody? Can't we just be nice guys, period? Or is there something in our desire to be nice to evil, to identify with evil, that actually is the sign of evil's corruption? Is mercy toward evil itself a seed of evil growing in our own hearts? When Shaul had mercy on Amalek, was that a symptom of the evil that was growing in his own heart that would cause him to commit atrocities against his own people? Are those Jews who empathize with Islamic terrorists actually growing in cruelty toward other Jews? Now, let's get in our Tanakh time machine one more time. And we're going to go further ahead. King Ahab and his worst half, Izebel or Jezebel, are ruling in the kingdom of Israel. You probably know both of them from another story, but that's not the story we're going to talk about now. So Ben-Hadad, who's the king of Aram, decided to throw his weight around. So he sent a message to Ahab, your gold and your silver, your wives and your sons, they all belong to me. And Ahab said, no, sure boss, whatever you say. And Ben-Hadad, like a good bill collector, he followed up and he told Ahab, I'm going to send some of my people around tomorrow, and they're going to go through all your things and through all your people, and they're going to take away anything they want. And Ahab said, oh, he really means it. So Ahab talked it over with his advisors, and they said, don't do it. And Ahab sends word back to Ben-Hadad, can we just be reasonable about it? And Ben-Hadad throws in a 300 moment. He threatens Ahab, the dust of the Shamron won't be enough to cover all my armies. And Ahab takes his shot at a comeback. It's not a very good comeback. The guy putting on his armor shouldn't brag like the guy who's taking it off. And Ben-Hadad doesn't even bother replying to that. He just invades. And Ahab is afraid. He's a coward. When he finally dies later, it's because he actually disguises himself and tries to direct the attack of the enemy of the king of Aram toward King Yehoshaphat, because he's a coward. And when the dogs lick his blood, which they later do, it's because he was a coward. He's afraid of Ben-Hadad. He wouldn't protect his wives or his sons against him, but a prophet shows up and he tells Ahab, it's going to be okay. And Ben-Hadad and all the kings who come with him, they have a great plan. They have so much overwhelming firepower, they just sit in their tents and they get drunk and prepare just to win the war. And 7,000 Israelis attack this huge army, which is over 100,000 men, and they smash it to pieces and Ben-Hadad runs away. But Ben-Hadad's advisors have a great plan. Don't worry, they tell the Aramean king. We only lost because the God of the Jews is the God of the mountains, and we're going to attack the Jews in the valley, and that's going to be fine because God has no power in the valley whatsoever. Also, we're going to get rid of this whole drunken king's command structure. We're going to have a professional army this time. Sounds like a great plan. So Ben-Hadad goes for it, round 2. The Israelis are vastly outnumbered, the Arameans are everywhere, and God sends another message to Ahab through the prophet. Thus says the Lord, because the Arameans said that God is a God of the mountains, not of the valleys, I'm going to give this entire horde into your hand, and you will know that I am God. The men of Israel don't just win. 7,000 Jews kill 100,000 enemy soldiers in one day. Ben-Hadad escapes with 27,000 men. He still outnumbers the Jews 4-1, and then the wall falls on all his men. He has no army left, and this is really a very, very bad situation. He goes into his chamber, he's very depressed and unhappy, and his advisors who have gotten into this mess, they go into the chamber with him, and for the first time ever, they have some good advice for him. You know, advisors in Tanakh generally don't have very good advice. This time around, this is one of those unique situations in the Tanakh where they actually have good advice. And what is their advice? Hine na shamanu, we heard, ki malchei beis Yisrael, ki malchei chesed heim. We heard that the Jewish kings are very merciful. They're very nice people. Just ask the king of Israel, ask King Ahab for mercy, and maybe he'll feel very sorry for you. And so Ben-Hadad's advisors carry a message to Ahab, which is basically, let me live. And how does Ahab respond to the tyrant who wanted to take his wives and his children? He's my brother. And Ahab brings Ben-Hadad into his chariot. They make a peace deal. Ben-Hadad leaves, and the prophet finds Ahab again and says to him, basically, you idiot. God wanted Ben-Hadad dead. You spared his life. Now Aram is going to kill you. And instead of Aram being defeated, Israel will be defeated. Okay. We think of this kind of thing as being medieval. We all know that the right thing to do is to have a peace treaty, to extend a hand to the defeated enemy and to make them like you. We know that's true, but God seems to disagree. And Ahab is unhappy. And this is where the story that we actually know about him begins, because he goes home, he's depressed. What's going to cheer him up? Planting a herb garden. Let's not be judgmental. I guess planting a herb garden is what makes him happy. The problem is that the herb garden is actually in the vineyard of a guy named Navot. He asks Navot to sell the vineyard. Navot refuses. Ahab and his wife have him killed. And then the prophet comes back to Ahab and tells him that the dogs are going to lick your blood in the place where they lick the blood of Navot. The next war, an Aramean archer kills Ahab, and the dogs end up licking his blood. And Malachim Aleph, Kings 1, ends. Now, how are the two incidents, the war with Aram and the vineyard of Navot, related? Is God punishing Ahab for not killing Ben-Hadad or for killing Navot? The answer is both. When Ben-Hadad's advisors said that the kings of Israel were merciful, what did they really mean? Omri, Ahab's dad, he got the job of king by attacking Zimri, who set the palace on fire and died. Zimri got the job by wiping out the entire family of Baasha. Baasha got the throne, see if you can guess, by killing the previous king. You get the idea. How did Ben-Hadad's advisors look at this succession of murders and think, the kings of Israel, they're very nice guys. They're very merciful. Did they really mean that Ahab and the rest of the gang were nice guys? Or they meant that they were weak. Ahab let Ben-Hadad push him around before the war. He let him push him around after the war. And the advisors were betting that Ahab was still weak. Why was Ahab weak? His dad Omri despised Israel. He brought in the Phoenicians and married his son off to Jezebel. He drove out Judaism and replaced it with the worship of Baal. But he still had a problem. He was the king of Israel, and Israel was inferior in his eyes. That was why Ahab was so insecure, even after he won the war. Why he couldn't stand up to Ben-Hadad before or after the war. He wanted to be like Ben-Hadad. He wanted Ben-Hadad to like him. And when God beats Ben-Hadad for him, Ahab doesn't feel closer to God. He feels closer to Ben-Hadad. When Ben-Hadad begs him for mercy, Ahab raises him up and calls him brother. Does Ben-Hadad call Ahab brother? No, he doesn't. He doesn't see him as a brother. But Ahab desperately wants to be Ben-Hadad's brother. Like Pari's overseers, Ahab desperately wanted Ben-Hadad to like him. He senses that foul odor of Jewishness on himself and rejects the God who brought him victory. Is Ahab merciful? Shortly afterward, he kills a Jewish man over an herb garden. But he calls the monster who demanded his wives and children as trophies brother. Ahab is evil, but he's also pathetic. He's despicable in the unique way of Jewish anti-Semites who aspire to be loved by those who hate them, who call enemies brother and murder their true brothers. It wasn't Ben-Hadad who was the real problem. It was Ahab who wanted to be Ben-Hadad. It's the Ben-Hadad sitting inside our own heads. It's how flattered we feel when an enemy seems to be willing to give us the time of day, and how we resent those Jews who proudly stand up for themselves, who aren't nice to the enemy. What we want isn't really peace, it's what Ahab wanted, acceptance. Think about Kostner praising Kurt Becher, the Jews who meet with Arafat and Abbas. The tragedy of Jewish history is not that we are hated, it's that we have absorbed that hatred, that we have learned to hate ourselves. We don't love our enemies because we are virtuous. We do it because we despise ourselves. The foul odor is not in the nose of Pari and the Philistines. It's in our own noses. Anti-Semitism here or in Israel isn't going anywhere. It's up to us how we respond to it. When we are insecure, anti-Semitism gets worse. When we are on the defensive, we will be bullied. The more excuses we make, the worse the attacks will become. It's wonderful that Israelis are incredibly inventive, but the Hasbara that emphasizes it, look how many things Israelis have invented. It's the same old defense the Jews have always had against anti-Semitism. Look how talented we are. Look how good we are. Why do you hate us? And you know the only thing that does, the only thing that listing how many Nobel Prizes we've won does, it makes us more hated, whether it's Jews or Israel. It never works as a defense. The more we keep dishing out reasons not to hate us, the more we'll be hated. If we really want anti-Semitism to end, we have to stop worrying about it. I know that's a little paradoxical, and caring about persecuted Jews is always very important, but being sensitive to self-hatred, being sensitive to hatred is self-defeating. It invites us to fall into Stockholm Syndrome, to start seeing ourselves as they see us. And then to find Jewish scapegoats for anti-Semitism. It's those Jews who are religious. It's those Jews who are in the settlements. It's those Jews who make us look bad. The ones who make us smell bad, the Pari and the Philistines and the New York Times. The answer to self-consciousness is to stop being self-conscious, to stop worrying what everybody else thinks about us. And this is what we must do as a people. Not because it will make us be liked, but because we can. We should never stop fighting for our rights individually, religiously, and nationally. But we should never do it from a defensive position. We should never surrender an inch of moral authority to those who hate us. No matter what we did or did not do, we must never apologize for our existence. The best forms of resistance to hatred of Jews in Israel are pride, dignity, and success. It is not the politicians or the presidents who will determine our worth. No president will move the embassy to Jerusalem, not Obama or Trump, until we decide that it is our eternal capital in deeds, not in words. Their policies will not change until we change ours. No president will save us from ourselves. Terrorism against Israel will not end until we stop tolerating it. Anti-Semitism will not go away with a clever new gimmick. We make great efforts to get others to believe in our worth. No one will believe in us, in our right to be free and to live until we believe in ourselves. The state of Israel was reborn because we worked for it, and we believed that we could do it because we had a right to it. The right hasn't gone anywhere, only our conviction in it has faltered. President Trump's visit to Israel was surrounded by drama over whether the White House would name the Kotel, the Western Wall, as being in Israel. Okay, they've admitted that it's in Jerusalem, but did they mean that it's Jerusalem and Israel? And all this insecurity is ultimately a dead end. We parsed every single utterance. We delved into Talmudic depths of just what exactly every single White House press statement meant. But the bottom line is, until we believe that it's actually in Yerushalayim, until we actually treat it as our own, no country, no president, no administration, no matter what they say before they get elected or how nice they are to us or how many Jewish friends they have, is going to recognize what we are not ready to recognize ourselves. Every previous administration has promised to move the embassy to Jerusalem, or almost every previous administration, and none of them have actually done it. And that's the way it's going to be. Until we make it clear that no part of Yerushalayim is on the table, nobody's going to accept that. No country is going to accept what we're not ready to accept ourselves. Why should any country, why should any president, whether it's Trump or anybody, have more conviction than we do? We keep waiting around for a new party to come around who will know Yosef. And then the new administration comes around, and just like every previous party, they also don't know Yosef. And we're disappointed, but we're sure that the next party, he's going to really know Yosef. And we go on playing the same game. What's our current strategy for Israel? We're going to show how nice we are by cooperating in the peace process. We're going to freeze settlements. We're going to freeze this. We're going to turn over land to the terrorists. And this time, they're going to see that we're the ones who want peace, and the other side doesn't want peace. It's never worked before. Never once has it worked before with any administration. But this time, after all these decades, this time it's absolutely bound to work. This time they'll actually like us. What we're actually showing is that we're the easiest to pressure, we're the weakest, we're the most vulnerable. We're the ones who will actually give in when pressure is applied to us. We're never going to prove that we deserve the whole coat by being willing to take half the coat. We're not going to win the respect of President Trump by making more concessions. The strategies we're following have been discredited over and over again. We're not following these strategies because they work. They've never worked. But because we want to be liked and because we're afraid to be hated. We're still waiting for someone else to believe in us when we don't believe in ourselves. We're waiting for President Trump to give us permission to have our capital in Yerushalayim. We're waiting for someone else to take care of Iran, to recognize that we have a right to our own country, that we have a right to exist. But that's not how it works. Even when a temporary recognition happens, it's quickly withdrawn. The Balfour Declaration was followed by the White Paper. Partition in the UN was followed by Zionism as racism. Our great alliance with France, which once used to be an even closer ally than the United States, ended with the Cherbourg boats. The Jewish alliance and the British for homeland ended with an invasion of Yerushalayim by Muslim armies under British officers. We like to believe that Israel exists because Truman handed it to us, but that's not true. There were factors that occasionally aligned in our favor, but Israel exists because Jews worked for it, prayed for it, wished for it, lived for it, fought for it, and died for it. The patron theory of the existence of Israel holds us back. Other people invent independent founding myths. They did it all on their own. We invent dependent founding myths. We have Israel because Eddie Jacobson was Truman's great friend. The reality is that Truman did as little as possible for the creation of Israel, and he did it for reasons that had nothing to do with his friendship with Eddie. He did it for reasons of an upcoming election and the Jewish vote in New York. But we like to think about Eddie and Harry. We like to think that we got Israel because Harry Truman liked us, because Harry Truman liked Eddie, even though Harry Truman was an anti-Semitic bigot who told his biographer that he had never had a Jew in the house and he was never going to have one now. But we like to think that Harry Truman liked us. That's why we have Israel. Because we would rather be Eddie than King David. We would rather be the person who is actually liked by the majority than actually stand up for ourselves and have pride in ourselves. The fact of the matter is that Truman gave us nothing except a throwaway vote, no de facto recognition, and an arms embargo to a country expected to see destroyed by the Arab invaders. There were Jews who went to fight in Israel who actually ended up facing criminal prosecution for it. The real story is that it was the young men and women who held out in small numbers in even smaller villages. It was Holocaust survivors fresh from the DP camps with a rifle in their hands and a tattoo on their arms who made Israel possible. It was God who gave us the land and gave us the ability to fight for it, as he did to Moshe and even Ahab. Israel doesn't exist because anybody liked us. It will not continue existing because anybody likes us. It exists because enough Jews realized that the communists, the French who wanted Dreyfus's head, the British, the Arabs, and so many others would never like us. Israel's independence represents the end of that need to be dependent, to be a minority, dependent on the goodwill of the majority. Some thought that creating Israel would end anti-Semitism. It didn't. But more importantly, creating Israel did not end Jewish insecurity. Israel is, of course, unfairly treated in the world, the same way that the Jews are treated unfairly. Anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is a symptom of anti-Semitism. But the great thing about anti-Zionism is that Jews have the illusion that they can get to play. Jews can be anti-Zionist too. There were plenty of Jews that would have happily joined the Nazi Party the way they joined the Communist Party if they'd only been allowed to. With anti-Zionism, they're allowed to join. They're allowed to hate Jews. And self-hating Jews can pretend that it's not about them, it's about Israel. If we all turn around and go back to Egypt or Europe, Pari will like us again. Israel is treated unfairly by the world, but Israel sets us up for it because it cares about what the world thinks. Israel was strongest in its Shmum days, when it didn't allow itself to become dependent on any single country, when it acted first and apologized later. You know the real story about being liked? Most of the world does not care about being liked. The French do not sit around worrying, do they like us or not? Neither do the Norwegians or the Easter Islanders with their giant stone heads. They don't worry, what does everybody think of our giant stone heads? They don't worry about it. This is something that Jews do all the time. The more we demand recognition of Jerusalem, of Israel, of our right to exist, the more we actually ask for acceptance, the less likely we are to get it. The more concerned we are about anti-Semitism, the more of it there will be. Searching for approval will never win us friends, only invite critics, enemies, and foes. Only conviction in our cause and living our best lives will. Im tirtzu ein zo aguda. If you desire it, if you have the conviction, it is no dream. That is the life that Ariel lived. It was a short life, but also a glorious one. He confronted challenges as if they weren't there. He followed his dreams. That is also the story of the Jewish people at our best. At our best, our talents are astounding. Ariel had the belief that he could do anything. That is what we often lack. We lose faith in God, and then we lose faith in ourselves. We become contemptible in our own eyes. And then in the eyes of our oppressors. And then God redeems us out of our exile. But the exile isn't just around us. It's not just a place where we are. It's inside us. The galut is inside us. When we lose the certainty of our divine origins, we become exiled from the first and founding source of our greatness. Oppression destroys our confidence in our identity. Our eternal identity is built on faith. We carry it with us whenever we go. It is our conversation of millennia. By taking part in it, Ariel became immortal. He lives on in the Jewish people. When we take part in it, we also become immortal. Physical exile alone cannot kill us. We are all going to die after all. Gas chambers and bombs cannot destroy us. Only when we forget who we are, that we are the sons and daughters of kings, do we lose our part in the conversation and die. My speech is ending, but the Jewish conversation must endure. The faith that we pass down in words must be lived in deeds. Resistance to anti-Semitic and anti-Israel attacks begins with the conviction that we pass down to our children, as Robert and Karen passed it down to Ariel. It ends with the pride that we take in our God, our people, and our country. Ariel had always wanted to visit Israel, but he never had the opportunity. Late in his life, there was a plane ticket, but he could no longer fly. We can fly. Part of paying tribute to someone who has passed on is living their dreams. Ariel's dream is part of that great mass of Jewish dreams that begins with Avram's dream. It is a dream of a people in the Holy Land, forever close to God, to our past, to our present, to our future. It is easy to lose sight of that dream. That is what happens so often to us in exile. But the best defense is still not in our arguments, in the hasbara that we try to assiduously teach, but in passing down the passion and conviction of that dream to our children. Anti-Semitism at the world at large may never end, but let Jewish self-hatred end among the Jews. As much as we like to argue, we cannot argue ourselves into existence, but we can dream tomorrow into existence by living in the past, present, and future, in this world and the world to come, in the secular world and in the Torah world, in exile and in Israel. And when we straddle both worlds, our world and the world of God, we are immortal, not face of evil. As were the Hasidim who sang and danced at the gas chambers. We are raised above our worries about what Pari and the New York Times think of us. We are lifted above hatred and self-hatred. And then, finally, at long last, we become the immortal Jewish nation that we were meant to be.
Daniel is going to take some questions.
Yes, please go ahead.
So in 1989, Jordan gave up all claims to what they call the West Bank. And at that time, Israel could have annexed Judea and Samaria. The problem they thought was, well, they would have to give voting rights and citizenship to all of the Arabs. Right now, there are, I think, 11 seats held by the Arab party. That would have caused, that would mean there would be at least 25 seats, which makes the Arab parties, without any population increase on the part of the Arabs, that would make them a majority, not a majority, but a major player in the Knesset. So I see the whole thing right now as no place to go. They can't annex this because they would have to give them, and it has nothing to do with being liked or not liked, it's just a practical consideration. So they can't annex, they can't not annex, they can't, there's nothing to do at this particular time. So I'd like to know what you would think of that particular, it seems like there is no solution to this problem.
Well, there is a solution. It's called the Gordian knot. If you recall history, Alexander the Great could not untie a knot, so he just chopped it in half. The demographic argument which you brought up is certainly a very compelling argument, but it presumes that we would be granting voting rights and full living status to the enemy population within Israel. Now, this would have been more of an issue after the Six-Day War. At this point, much of that population at this point either is affiliated with Hamas or other terrorist groups. So the question is, even aside from voting rights, could we actually maintain an enemy population, much of which actually carries arms, tens of thousands at the very least of which have carried arms on behalf of enemy forces? And really, Israel's Arab population is not an undifferentiated mass. There are particular clans, and this is something Mordechai Kedar has gone in very well, that are the cause of much of the problem. When you look at Hamas and the PLO, many of those clans are actually linked to the violence. And if you actually address some of those clans, you actually end up with an Arab population that would be smaller, but it also would be more congenial to remaining within Israel. And this is something we have to distinguish. There's not a large, undifferentiated mass that's a Palestinian narrative, and it's a narrative that we have to take apart.
But what would you do with that, the Hamas and those people who are living there right now?
They can't exist inside Israel, obviously. They can't exist inside Israel now.
Exile them, or?
Yes.
All right. That would be a different.
You can't have people who are trying to exterminate you inside your own country. Whatever you do, it doesn't work. If they did sign a peace deal tomorrow and there were separate states, those states would still be lobbing missiles and shells and trying to kill. So there's no future in that either way.
We are required. How do you get the message out to not only those who are in the forefront of the governmental issues, but to our people?
That's a good question, but the thing is you actually do begin with the choir. When you have a concrete base, when you have people who solidly understand the issues, they can influence others. Our great problem is that we don't really have that base. We don't really have a choir. We have a rather muddled sense of what we ought to be doing, what we ought to not be doing. When you have 5% or 10% who actually understand what the issue is and what needs to be done, everything proceeds from there because the majority of people are really uncertain. If you can actually have even 1% of people who know what ought to be done, a great deal can come from that. I'm sorry, in the back?
Moshe Feiglin and his Jewish leadership.
Yes. I think Moshe Feiglin and Shmuel Saket have been doing great work. I was involved with them back in the day. I think Jewish leadership is vitally important. It's not going to see immediate results, but it's something that's effective down the road.
In the first place, I think that part of the problem also is the Israeli government. And what I mean by that is that they keep undermining the whole idea of self-confidence. I mean, every time that they refer to the occupation, every time they refer to the communities in Judea and Samaria as settlements, every time they do a settlement freeze, even the fact that, the problem that they have with East Jerusalem is largely because there's 250,000 Arabs there that are not citizens, and who, after 1967, they allowed to sort of squat there. And it's very, it's hard for me personally sometimes to understand. I understand that they have pressure from, say, the United States and other places, but I don't see how that problem is going to be solved unless that problem gets solved.
That's a very good point, and there's a very important point working in that, which is that we should never use the language of the enemy. We should never use the language of occupation. We should never accept the premises of their arguments, because the left sneaks its way into our minds. It implants itself by actually getting us to use their arguments. And the Israeli government, because of the language of diplomacy, has accepted much of those premises. And the result is we constantly undermine our own case on a regular basis, sometimes without even realizing it.
Oh, I agree with you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much. I'm sure Daniel will be willing to talk to you privately afterwards. But Dr. Goldberg is going to come up, say the Kel Malay, and then I'll say the Kaddish to Rabbanan. So please rise.
El Molei Rachamim Shochein Bamiromim Hamatzei Menucha Nechana Al Kanfei Ashchina B'malo es Kedoshim Uteharim Kezohar Arakiya Mazahirim Es Nishmas Ariel Chaim Ben Ruven Yaakov V'Chasya Shehalach Le'olamo Ba'avor Shekulanu Notnim Tzedaka B'yad Askaras Nishmaso V'ganei Eden Tehei Menuchaso Lochein Bala Rachamim Yasireu V'seisa Kenafav Li'olamim V'yitzror Mitzror Achayim Es Nishmaso Adonai Unachlaso V'yanuach V'shalom Al Mishkavo V'nomar Amen.
Gadalvi, Gadash Merabah. Almighty Frachotei. Yamlich Malchotei. Chaychon of Yamechon of Chayedachopet Israel. Pagala, Bisman Kariv Imru, Amen. Eshmer Rabam Varach. Me'amaya. It Barach Vishtabach Vipar Vitaram Vitnasei. Vitadar Vitalev Vitalal. Shmet Kushabrich. Leila Min Kobir Katav Shirata. Tishbakatav Nechmata. Damiran Biamavi Imru Amen. Israel Rabbanan Val Tamideon. V'al Kol Tamideon. V'al Kol Mandaskin Biaraita. Diva Atra Haden V'diva Cholatar V'atar. Yehelon Ulchon Shlamar Rabbachina V'chistav Rachamei. Chayer V'cheim Zinei V'chei. U'ferkan Min Kadam Ovun Diva Shmaya V'imru Amen. Heshlam Rab Min Shmaya V'chaim. Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. V'seh Shalom B'mramav V'yaseh Shalom. Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Karen and I thank you for attending. We invite you to brunch.